Maureen O'Sullivan, 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. And Minister, my question relates to Libya and the conditions in the detention centres there and how you can be part of addressing this at a European level.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. I'm deeply troubled by the escalation of violence in Libya in recent months, and we've spoken about it in this House on a number of occasions, particularly the ongoing fighting around Tripoli, which is endangering thousands of civilians and putting already vulnerable migrants and refugees in Libya at further risk. The EU has called on all parties to immediately implement a ceasefire and to engage with the UN to ensure a full cessation of hostilities. I participated in the May meeting of the Foreign Affairs Council, where UN Special Representative Salami briefed us on the situation, and the Council reiterated the EU's support for the UN-led peace process. Human rights abuses against migrants and refugees in Libya, particularly in detention centres, are a matter of grave concern. The Libyan government, of course, bears primary responsibility and must manage migration in full compliance with international law, although we are aware that the government does not have full control over many areas in the context of Libyan territory. The EU is maintaining political pressure on the Libyan authorities to end the system of detention centres and is working with UNHCR and the International Organisation for Migration to ensure that other options exist to protect and assist refugees and migrants. The EU High Representative highlighted the priority that the EU attaches to this issue when she met the Libyan Prime Minister in May 2019. Although cooperation with the UN and the African Union, through cooperation with the UN and the African Union, the EU has also helped over 45,000 people stranded in Libya to return voluntarily to their countries of origin and has evacuated close to 4,000 people in need of international protection. Since many more people remain at risk, the EU will continue to work with its partners to relocate them to safe places. Ultimately, bringing real improvements to the lives of Libyans and migrants and refugees in Libya will require restoration of political stability. Ireland and the EU will maintain pressure on all parties to work towards a negotiated solution to the conflict, ensure access for humanitarian organisations, which I think is hugely important so that we can get accurate testimony to what's happening, and ultimately to put an end to the system of detention in Libya. But I am not unrealistic about the scale of the challenge that we face and the timelines that we're working on.
Supplementary, Deputy O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Minister. I mean, it's very difficult to understand why these detention centres continue to exist in Libya for two reasons. One, the conditions that we know that are in those centres, and secondly, that they are in a country that is not stable and is also in conflict. I think there's two related issues as well. One, you mentioned about the forced returns, and the other one is the situation in the Mediterranean. And whether it's detention centre, forced return, or in the Mediterranean, there's really psychological and physical trauma to all of those who are involved there. And I know that some of the NGOs took great heart from your words recently, and I'll quote them to you when you said that migrants stranded in the Med need a much more coordinated and collective response from the EU. Ad hoc arrangements on a case-by-case basis, it's not sustainable or humane, and the EU is better than this. So that's what the question is how you, as a minister at EU level, can address these particular issues. And my particular question is, there's a summit on migration in Valletta, Malta, next week. So will the government be represented there attending, and if not, why not?
1 minute, please, Tánaiste.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, can I say that I absolutely stand over that quote that you quoted from me. I have been quite critical of the EU in terms of our inability to be able to agree collectively an approach, not just on migration generally, but on the need for humanitarian assistance and rescue capacity in the Mediterranean. I know there is a concern about creating pull factors and so on. I think there is some legitimacy to that concern, but I do not think it is morally acceptable for the European Union not to put resources into ensuring that people are not drowning in the Mediterranean. And, you know, as someone who was a defence minister when we decided to send naval vessels to the Mediterranean, effectively on a humanitarian mission, working in partnership with Italy. I think our ships took about 14,000 people out of the sea. So the idea that we would knowingly allow people to drown in the Mediterranean and not have an agreed capacity to respond to that in a more humane way than is currently the case, for me is not acceptable. And I've said that on a number of occasions to my colleagues around the Foreign Affairs Council. That being said, the politics of this is really difficult. I hope we'll be able to make more progress on this in the context of a new Italian government, who may, I hope, take a more supportive position in relation to the plight of refugees.
Deputy O'Sullivan's final supplementary.
Yeah, thanks, Minister. And there's certainly a change in the Italian government now from the previous Interior Minister, who had the attitude that any ship could face up to €1 million fine, and the captain could be arrested and the ship impounded. So there is a little bit more progress being made. You didn't mention if we were going to be represented in Valletta, and if we are or are not. I mean, there are some calls on this that we do need, and I'm supporting some of the NGOs like MSF on this, a sustainable and a predictable disembarkation system that ensures the survivors' well-being, and that there is an end to the system at the moment of these forced returns to Libya. I mean, people are fleeing Libya, they're being caught, and then they're being forced back into dreadful conditions there. And we do need a more proactive and a sufficient European search and rescue capacity. Now, I know that what the Italian government or minister is trying to do, France and Germany seemingly have reportedly given their green light to the new system, which would put an end to case-by-case negotiations. And Luxembourg, Malta, Portugal, Romania and Spain, we learn, are also agreeing, but there's no mention of Ireland in that. So are Ireland part of that? And also the Valletta meeting. If we're not going, why not?
Final response.
Yeah, sorry, no, Ireland is part of that group. We have said that we would play our part in terms of burden sharing, so that we wouldn't have this case-by-case series of phone calls every time there is an NGO vessel or a state vessel that has migrants on board, in the hope that different countries will take 10 refugees here, 20 there, 30 there. I mean, we have done that and have been doing that now for the last year, quietly, taking our share and trying to support people in a humane way. So we would like to have a system that a large number of the member states of the EU would buy into. Otherwise, we're unfairly asking certain countries to take too much of the burden here. And this was, of course, the problem for Italy in the first place, which is why politics responded by electing someone who was advocating for a hardline message on migration. So we need to help Italy, but we also need to ensure that burden and that responsibility is shared. In relation to the Valletta meeting, I'm not sure actually, because I'm in New York next week, so is Minister Cannon, but I'll check for you whether we're sending somebody. I have a very good relationship with my counterpart in Malta, but I'll check whether we're sending someone to the Valletta meeting.
Deputy